And so to this evening, once again, if you'd like to draw in, come down into the room. Don't talk at the back of the bar. You're here to hear John. They're not, are they? Should we just pack up and go home now? John is here to launch his book, Reporter, which is his autobiography and memoirs. It covers 40 years of being one of the best known, probably one of the most popular journalists in Asia. So it's an intimate one. The book is available in the club at 765 baht, a special price. It's in hardback. John wanted to know how many copies he should bring up and worked out the maximum number of people could have in the room. So he decided that we bring 132 copies to Bangkok. The club record is 131 sales at a book launch, so we're going to go for it. But at this point, we've actually run out of books. So Asia Books is conjuring up some more, and they'll be in the club in the next 20 minutes. John has attracted an all-star audience tonight. If you have a look around the room, there's a whole host of faces from the past 40 years. We've got Roger Crutchley from the Bangkok Post and Tony Waltham. We have Michael Hayes from the Phnom Penh Post, Mark Dodd, Barry Wayne, Philip Bowring of the Far East Economic Review and the IHT, Steve Van Beek, Keith Richburg, Jim Pringle. We have Colonel Lockie Thompson, who was the Australian military attaché 4 times in Bangkok. And we have more former presidents in the club than you ever want to see, including myself, Dominic Falder, if you don't know me. Yuli Ishmartono is here, and Bertil Lintner is also here. And that's just to name a few. I think everybody knows each other, and John is going to pick them out, but it would be wonderful to have an interchange as we go through the evening. So, John, you've written this book. The cover speaks of a different time when bars in Bangkok were more dangerous. Should we be afraid?
Afraid of me, you mean? I'd just like to point out to everybody that the people on the cover, that's not a rock group. It's a bunch of Moro National Liberation Front fighters who I met, I think, back in about 1976 in a place called Marawi City, which is in Mindanao, as I think some of you know. Arguably, at that time, the dirtiest city I'd ever been to, I think. It was under Islamic administration, and when I went back several years later, nothing much had changed. When my wife, Yuli Ishmartono, went back, when was that last time you were back? It was about 3 years ago, I think. She said it had undergone an incredible transformation. So I hope that's right.
So what should we be looking for in the book?
Well, I think, I've prepared some remarks here because I'd like to start off, if possible, to talk about the people, my human landmarks, if you like, in my career through Asia. I wouldn't be here, really, if it wasn't for my sources and for my friends. So I'd like to thank you all for coming. For many of you, I would hope that your presence here has much to do with our long friendship and the experiences we've shared in Asia and elsewhere, of course, as the launching of this rather modest memoir. I had a bit of a chuckle when Dominic proposed calling this event an evening with John McBeth to get away from the idea that this was some sort of naked exercise in commercial exploitation. A little pretentious. I thought when a lot of you have spent a great many evenings with me, usually over a beer in a dark place. Indeed, for some of the visiting players here, I strongly suspect this is one of those rare heaven-sent opportunities to relive some of their past misdeeds in a city that has never taken a nap, even during a curfew. Gentlemen, let me say here that I admire the quality of your livers and the heights of your ambition. Before going further, I'd like to offer a special thanks to my Singapore publisher who can't be here tonight, Ian Pringle. Ian took on this book when literary agents in Australia decided that the fact that I was a New Zealander was not a selling point with Australians. They may be right, of course. I'd also like to thank, in particular, Joe Wendell for the magnificent job he did in enhancing all the photographs. You'll see from the cover that was a photograph taken in 1976. It was a colour picture. I think he did a fantastic job in making it look the way it is now. I first met Joe when he was a US Navy lieutenant in Seoul during my time there, and we have remained in touch since he left the service and entered the financial world in Singapore. He's also, of course, got a sideline in photography. I'd also like to acknowledge here, as I was saying to Dominic, a host of other people who have not only helped me in my career, some as colleagues, some as sources, some as just friends, but have become people who I've stayed in touch with down through the years. As you will see in the book, and as I said before, many of them are living landmarks on my journey through Asia. Having said that, I'd like to introduce these people to you, because I'm sure some of you don't know who they are. When I mention your names, I'd like you to raise your hand so that everybody can see who you are. That's why I think you should come forward a little more. I'm going to start with a man known as the Fat Chinaman. And we don't say that in a derogatory way, it's in a very human way. The Fat Chinaman is former ABC Australian cameraman Willie Pryor. Willie, where are you? There he is, over by the air conditioner. Willie has made a special trip from Singapore just to ensure that I wouldn't be the oldest man here. Willie is 83. He's a legend in his own lifetime. He covered Vietnam and numerous other crises around the region, and like a lot of us, was a close friend of the late Neil Davis. Willie's chaperone for the evening was to have been Ian McIntosh, former ABC correspondent who spent many years in the region and is now a Sydney-based consultant for CNN and ABC television. Possibly the only person I know who is more of a rugby fanatic than I am. Ian unfortunately got called away to Atlanta at the last minute. Here I'd like to acknowledge also two people who have come the furthest tonight. That is Jay Solomon, the national security correspondent for the Wall Street Journal, and his partner Janina. Jay I met in Jakarta in the mid-1990s. He and another younger colleague, Dan Murphy, who later went on to work for the Christian Science Monitor, are two of the very few young generation journalists who actually took some notice of me and occasionally listened to what I told them. The fact that they've gone on to what I think are great careers in journalism speaks a lot for the sort of work they did in Jakarta in those early days. I'm sorry that Dan can't be with us. He's in Benghazi as we speak. Now, five people here who are very special for me are former colleagues from the Bangkok Post. By the way, Jay, did you raise your hand? Yes, good. Five people here are former colleagues from the Bangkok Post, which gave me my first primer, the best primer I could have had in learning about Thailand and how to work in an Asian environment. The stories for a kid like me from New Zealand were amazing, to tell you the truth. It was like being let loose in an amazing candy store for a young journalist who basically, covered some pretty mundane stuff in New Zealand, let me tell you. The first of these is Peter Finucane. Peter, are you here? Where are you, Peter? please. Raise your hand, Peter. He's not here?
He is. He's waving. He's coming forward.
Peter is the Post's former chief sub-editor, who more than 42 years later still works as an advisor to the newspaper. I might tell you, in those early days, Peter kept a set of scales just inside the door of his house. I'll let him explain why later. I'd like to mention Roger Crutchley, who comes from Reading in England, or a long time ago came from Reading in England, who was also on the Post when I joined, and like Peter, still lives in Bangkok. He became the sports editor, as I think some of you know, and he wrote a column in which he regaled us with hilarious tales about his maid, who was a country girl from the northeastern province of Yasothon. For some reason, we all had a special fondness, I suppose you could say, for Isan. The other person I'd like to acknowledge is features editor Tony Waltham. Tony, who owned his own long-tail boat, in which we spent great weekends exploring the city's network of klongs, then unencumbered, of course, by the curse of water hyacinth. Tony taught Roger Moore, the James Bond, as you know, how to operate one of these boats in the 1974 film The Man with the Golden Gun, which I think, as you know, some of it was shot in Bangkok and Phuket. Anurat Manipan, what I wrote here, where's Anurat? There she is. What I describe as a bubbly, hockey-playing graduate of England's prestigious Rodine School, began life as a reporter on the Post and retired just a few years ago as foreign editor. She is also a highly accomplished pianist. Then there's Kunpai San. Is he here?
I think he's coming. He's coming late. He'll be here.
Okay. Paisan, who rose to city editor on the Post and then became the first Thai to work full-time for the Far Eastern Economic Review. He later went back to the Post as editor, as I think some of you know. Paisan was an invaluable and engaging member of a great review bureau, which included regional correspondent Rodney Tasker and the intrepid Bertil Lintner. I'm sorry that Rodney could not be here tonight. Many of you will know his situation. All I can say is that we miss him and hope that life does not treat him any more harshly than it has. I would urge those of you who live in Bangkok to take time out to call on him at the village of Sapan Hin in Sukhothai. Bertil, of course, needs no introduction. I still remember the first day he came to our office in the Prinya building, just down here, in 1982, dressed in a sweat-soaked shirt, aging jeans, and worn-out flip-flops. I must admit, I thought, oh God, another backpacker with a story to tell, until he pulled out a hand-drawn map on which he had plotted government and rebel positions on a month-long trek through northeast Burma. I recommended we hire him, and the rest is history. Among others who have made the trek here, of course, are two of my long-suffering former editors on the Review, Philip Bowring. Philip is an International Herald Tribune columnist and founder of the Sentinel online commentary service, and the irascible David Plott. David, there he is, the irascible David Plott, who spends much of his time in Jakarta nursing the Jakarta Globe, the newspaper he helped launch 3 years ago. A third review editor, of course, Michael Vitikiotis, now the Southeast Asia director of the Honoré Dunant Centre for Humanitarian Dialogue, was called away on urgent peacekeeping business in Jakarta. Michael was a source of great encouragement, I have to tell you, to me during the writing of this book. He is represented here by his charming wife, Janique, who's from Mauritius originally. Travelling with David Plott from Jakarta as the Globe's editor, Lynn Newman. Lynn Newman.
He's here.
He was here. He's another old Asian hand who cut his teeth freelancing in the Philippines during the period before and after President Marcos's fall from power, and later worked in senior editorial positions in South Korea and Hong Kong. I'd also like to introduce Lindsay Murdoch, who probably needs no introduction, the Melbourne Age man in Darwin, who spent 7 years cutting a path of destruction through Asia. I won't go into any detail, but among Lindsay's exploits, an expense claim from Afghanistan for, quotes, damage caused to taxi by tank. Almost as good as former Newsweek correspondent Holger Jensen's famous damage caused to rental car in Warthog migration. Holger and a few of us often went on fishing trips in the Gulf of Thailand and the Andaman Sea, paid for by Newsweek car repairs. But he does swear that one is true. Talking of expense accounts, I think we also have among us former Newsweek and London Times correspondent Jamie Pringle. Jamie? There he is. Jamie Pringle, who has been in the region perhaps longer than I have. Jamie is best known for urgently inquiring of a fellow correspondent. I'm not going to do the Scottish accent, but it's, well, you bank your salary, don't you? Then we have, of course, Keith Richburg, the Wellington Post correspondent in Shanghai, who I first met during a street riot, if I remember correctly, in Seoul. We had many enjoyable experiences in the Philippines, including a trip across northern Luzon in a smoke-belching Land Cruiser interviewing provincial warlords. You'll see all that in the book. Also making a special trip from Australia is Mark Dodd. Mark, there he is, who turned to, he's actually a one-time pearl diver from Broome in Western Australia, who turned to freelancing in Cambodia and East Timor, and is now defence correspondent on the Australian newspaper. Mark will be happy to tell you about his interest in Russian agriculture. I have to tell you also that in July, Mark will be publishing his first book on the pearl industry in Broome in the good old days. I also have to mention here Barry Wayne. Barry, former editor of the Asian Wall Street Journal, now what they call the writer-in-residence at the Institute of Southeast Asian Studies. Barry has written several books, including one called The Refused, which was about the Indo-Chinese refugee invasion back in the 1970s and 80s. Here as well, I think, is David Jenkins. David? David is the former regional editor of the Far Eastern Economic Review and is slowly giving birth to a monumental book on President Suharto, which will be published when? Soon. I'm not sure if he's here tonight. Is Ted Schweitzer here tonight? There's Ted. Now we have a real-life action hero. Ted is the former United Nations High Commission for Refugees officer in Songkhla, who rescued hundreds of Vietnamese refugees from Kra Island in the Gulf of Thailand, where pirates had dumped them, then returned night after night to brutalize and rape them. I'm very glad you could be here, Ted. Another veteran of the resettlement program is Mac Thompson. Mac, there he is, the right-hand man of Lionel Rosenblatt, at the US refugee section, who still lives in Bangkok and who still makes regular forays into remote parts of Laos where he did his earlier relief work. Mac knows more refugees than you and I will ever know in our lives. When he goes to the United States, he stays with them, and I think he did some wonderful work. Also here tonight is Lee Dixon. Lee? Is he hiding? Lee is an understated, retired Australian police superintendent who helped lead the 2002 Bali bomb investigation. Lee is now a security consultant in Jakarta. We also have Alan Griffiths. Alan? There he is. A former Australian cabinet minister, I think Minister of Tourism and Public Works, something like that. He's a founder of a remarkably innovative and, as it turned out, profitable Melbourne-based company, which I wrote about in the early 2000s. Is Verghese Matthews here? Verghese told me he was coming, but he's my oldest Singaporean friend who I met as a second secretary in Bangkok in the mid-1970s. Verghese has been ambassador in South Africa and Cambodia and is now a visiting research fellow at the Institute of Southeast Asian Studies in Singapore. We have, of course, John McCarthy. John? Did he get here? Well, he's here in Bangkok. I know that. He's the former Australian ambassador to Thailand, who has filled more Asian ambassadorial posts than any other diplomat. I think he's been ambassador in Thailand, Jakarta. That's not Asia. India, Tokyo. He's done it all. John and I recently attended the memorial service in Canberra for Alec Longhurst, the former Australian Army Major, who was a student of the Thai Command and Staff College, gave me such an insider's look at the 1981 Young Turks coup. Of course, we can't forget Skip Boyce. The man with the umbrella, the former US ambassador to Indonesia and, of course, to Thailand, and now the Singapore-based head of Boeing in Southeast Asia. Skip, as you all know, is a drummer in his spare time and an aficionado of 1960s music. He'll be taking orders for the 787 Dreamliner after this program. As it happens, Colonel Lockie Thompson, Colonel Thompson, the former Australian military attaché in Bangkok, is also a musician, an accomplished saxophonist who took part in regular jam sessions with King Bhumibol, as well as being part of a band that played every Sunday afternoon at Pat Pong's Napoleon Lounge, sadly long gone. Ladies and gentlemen, left to my own devices, I would never have written this book. My wife, Yuli, made me do it. Tired of hearing the same old stories repeated over countless dinner tables around the region, and hoping, no doubt, that I would reveal more about my earlier life than I've told her so far. My initial reluctance stemmed from the fact that I can think of scores of colleagues, some younger than me, who have done more and led a much more eventful life than I have. I'm not a war correspondent, after all, and I've never had to parachute from one place to another with all that entails. But then I saw myself as the last of my generation, who went straight from high school into his hometown newspaper, came to Asia by ship. Yes, I came by ship, and made Asia my home. A lot of you here will have never used a typewriter. A lot of the younger ones here will have never used a typewriter or punched a 1920s era teleprinter. No matter what, you will certainly not have had the fun that I've had. Today's 24-hour news cycle means haste is everything, and there is little time for genuine reflection. Stuff which we had to research exhaustively is now readily available on Google. The internet is a marvelous tool, but I suspect a lot of journalists today do not pay the same attention to their sources as my generation did. The fact that many of these same people are here tonight or are still in touch with me is surely proof that nothing quite matches the warm body when it comes down to the real nitty-gritty of what the print journalist does. It has, I must say, been incredibly difficult cramming 40 years into a mere 380 pages and still making it readable. In the end, I guess I settled on the device of chronologically weaving together some of the best stories and the most interesting events I've covered around the region, often because of the fascinating characters, good and bad, who populate them. Talking about fascinating characters, one person I did forget to mention is Captain Israel Friedman. Captain Friedman, would you? Thank you. Izzy is a former Air America pilot, flew in Laos. He's been my dear friend for a long time, and I'm very happy that he's here tonight. Thank you. I'm sorry that some of my more illustrious colleagues have not written more about what I consider to be the golden age of journalism, which effectively stretched from World War II to the end of the last century. One who comes to mind, who I'm sure many of you may know of, is the late Donald Wise. He was a David Niven lookalike who survived the surrender of Singapore and Death Railway and went on to cover everything from the Belgian Congo to Vietnam for the Daily Express and the Daily Mirror. Donald had an unbelievable life and an unbelievable wit to match, and you'll see that in the book. Yet he couldn't find a publisher for a manuscript that I would have crawled over broken glass to read. He reportedly ended up throwing it off a cliff in Portugal. It would be the same, I think, for the late Kate Webb and quite a number of people here. Derek Williams, Jimmy Pringle, of course, Dennis Gray, just to name a few. We all have stories to tell, and after all, the story is what journalism is all about. Obviously, we didn't choose Bangkok as a launch point for nothing. For me, this is where it all began. More than 40 years ago, I arrived at Hua Lamphong railway station intending to stay for 10 days, then move on to what I thought would be a glittering career on Fleet Street. Instead, I stayed for 16 years. It was never a conscious decision, and I'm sure some of you share the same feeling. It just happened. That's the thing about Asia. It's certainly back when everything was new and adventurous. It just seemed to get its arms around you, in my case, literally and figuratively. Bangkok was almost a backwater then, an important staging ground, of course, for the war next door, but with none of the foreign tourist presence it has today. Everywhere I went in Bangkok in those early days, kids would come racing up to me yelling, "Farang, Farang." Strangely, the folks up country were not nearly as intrusive. Thais almost never ate Western food in those days. In fact, the only fast food place I can recall, I was telling Kun Bra tonight, was a small Kentucky Fried Chicken outlet on Silom Road, just up the street from where the Bangkok Bank headquarters is today. Ladies and gentlemen, I have never had a moment of regret. In fact, I consider myself privileged to have seen how Asia has transformed itself over the past 4 decades. Even today, whether you're based in China, Thailand, or Indonesia, it is still a great place for news. And that's why I'm still here. Thank you.
Right, we have, as usual, a microphone in the middle of the club, and I'm sure there's 101 people who would like to kick in. So if you could step forward, introduce yourself, and stand off. Peachy, I see you sitting there. You weren't noticed. And maybe we could get the TV camera to turn on the microphone so that we can see people. John, if you look back over 40 years, what's your standout highlight? What was the thing that wakes you up in the morning or in the middle of the night as a journalistic experience?
Gee, that's a really hard question. I mean, I sort of have to divide my career, I suppose, into two in a way. That was, I spent 16 years in Thailand. I have spent the same amount of time in Indonesia. So I guess the stories I covered in those two places were, stand out. I suppose if I wanted to narrow it down, it was all the period in the late 70s, early 80s, particularly with the politics roiling around in Indonesia and in Thailand with the coups. I think that was a fascinating time, and it's a time when, as a journalist, you really had to work hard to find out what was going on.
Right, Paisan, I can see you. So can you lead the way? You're used to talking on mic. Come and tell us about John McBeth. Well, anything. Paisan was the bureau chief for the Far East Economic Review, as John mentioned earlier.
I was asked by John a few weeks ago if I could say something for this occasion. So I said, of course I would. Would be more than happy to, for a special friend like John. I regard this as a privilege. Now I say John is a special friend because we have known each other for a long time, dating back to when? Early 1970s?
Yep.
Throughout my career, I have had the good fortune and some bad fortune as well, I suppose, to have known a lot of foreigners. But of all these foreign friends, I must say that John has stood out as someone special. I started working at the Bangkok Post in the early 70s. John was there already as a sub-editor. I suppose he was quite similar to the rest of the Farang subs at the Bangkok Post. The all too familiar story of coming to Thailand and falling in love with the press, or to be more exact, falling in love with some attractive ladies and deciding to stay on. But in many other respects, I suppose John was quite different from the other subs at the Bangkok Post. John was very committed to his profession and try a lot harder. So while the rest of the Farang subs at the Post stay on, John moved from the Post and moved on and on. First to the Asia Week, ใช่ไหมครับ?
Yep.
And then to the Review. I had the privilege of working with John for many years at the Review. I suppose that we enjoy a lot of good times together on the job and off the job. A lot of colorful anecdotes, which you all will read in the book, of course. But let me just share a few of John's likes and dislikes in those years. John grew to love Thai food very much. But I must say that his tastes are quite tamada, very tamada. So the usual dishes he ordered would be khao pad and yam nứa,
Yeah.
fried beef and spicy Thai salad. On the job, John became an expert on Thai affairs, especially on the Thai military affairs. He would take great pains to lined up all the intricate connections and networks of all the classes. I graduated from the John McBeth Academy. So in the aftermath of any coup, John would be there reporting about the logistics of how the coup were put together, which battalions, which regiments took over which government installations. Ask him, Colonel so-and-so belong to which class of John McBeth Academy? He will tell you right away. So read more in John's book. Perhaps we should toast for John, who have spent a well-worth life and has made some outstanding accomplishment as a journalist focusing on South Asia.
Thank
Cheers,
you, Pastor. Thank you.
Cheers.
Paisan, I'd also like to mention to you that in the book I refer to your Peugeot as being ruby red and not nipple pink.
Philip Baring. Can we have quiet at the back of the bar, please?
Yeah.
Philip should also say something.
Well, I just have to recollect that John was responsible for Kun Paisan's recruitment, but where did that take place? Do you remember?
At a bar somewhere in Pat Pong.
The Napoleon Bar.
Oh, is that right? You've got a better memory than I have.
Skip Boyce. Skip, why don't you come and say something? Most popular diplomat in Asia.
Well, I just want to know that I want everyone to know that Doug Ramage just showed up behind me here. He made a special trip from Jakarta just to be here. And the reason is, he said, I learned from this guy's writing is in grad school. And I think there's a lot of people who, whether they were in grad school or out in the region or wherever, in this room can say the same thing about John McBeth's writings. I know I'm one of them. I'm just really happy to be here, John.
Thank you.
Congratulations. Look forward to reading the book.
Thank you, Skip. Appreciate it.
Lucky. Not too much noise at the back, please, because we'll be fighting you if we have to do that.
John, you came to Bangkok and the region of Southeast Asia at a very fortunate time, I think, for somebody trying to make their mark in journalism. All the action was about us at that time. However, the action's moved on now, and it's more in the central part of Asia rather than Southeast Asia, the Middle East. And I'd like to ask you, as one who was lucky enough to arrive here at the right age and the right time, how do you think a young journalist in your shoes, if he hadn't got off the plane in Bangkok, but got off somewhere in the Middle East, what are the sort of problems, given the geographic differences, but more particularly the technological differences in communications that a young journalist has to face? How do you think you'd feature and you'd fare in such a situation as that?
I have to tell you that I feel incredibly sad for young journalists starting off in my profession today. It's a totally different job. You said, whether in the Middle East or even in Asia today, you're not going to have the adventure and the fun that I had working as a journalist. I mean, you know, you can have fun as a journalist, and I think we showed that during that period. But today, as I said, the news cycle is such that it's very difficult to actually be able to pause and reflect on what you're doing. And I fortunately stayed on when the story quite often moved off, but it always came back. And I'm pretty sure it's going to come back to Asia over time. I mean, I still think Indonesia and Thailand in particular have many unresolved problems that are going to come to a peak sooner or later. And so while the story at the moment rests in the Middle East, and it's a very good story, I still think that this is the place to be. Thank you.
All right, can we just keep it down at the bar, please? We're not going to be that much longer. Just not too loud. John, when you go back to the late 70s, you know, the Bangkok Post, what was the story that launched you into a different career? And do you think, when you look back on it, that it's very important for a journalist to get one story that gives them a signature and takes them forward?
Well, I think for me, the one story occurred about probably about 6 or 7 months after I got to Bangkok. I was living on the top floor of a hotel on Soi 2 called the Atlanta. It was a dormitory, 30 other guys were there with me, no air conditioning, no fans, no mosquito netting, no nothing. And I remember coming home rather drunk one night, and which you had to do to just sleep in this place. And I could see a fire from across the rail tracks in Soi Room Redi. And when I got there, it was the Imperial Hotel on fire. I arrived just in time to see a girl jump off the 4th floor and land on a parked car. I stayed there for 3 hours. I was the only journalist there. Amazing, really, when you think about it. I think more than 40 people died in that fire, but the authorities claimed it was only 24. But I think that one story, in which I wrote the lead story and just about the entire newspaper on that day, was it was the biggest story I'd ever covered in my life. And I think that's what really got me going in Asia.
Jim Pringle.
Hello, John. If there's one other person in this room that can understand a Scottish accent, it should be you with a name like McBeth. But I always hoped that one day you would go to see where your family originally came from. And when you started calling yourself the Thane of Cawdor, I knew that you must have been, so maybe you could tell us something about that. Now, additionally, you raised the possibility that the story would move back to the Far East. As you say, it's now hit the Middle East. I was talking to the right-hand man of Hun Sen in Cambodia last week, and I asked him if he thought the Jasmine Revolution that started in Tunisia might spread as far in as Cambodia. And he said, don't pray for it, because this is a virus that moves very fast. Are there any countries in Asia that you think might go the same way as Egypt and Tunisia and Libya and Bahrain and Oman? I think there are two. I think Cambodia is one, and I think the People's Republic of China is the other, because the Chinese leaders are trembling in their shoes at what's happening. What is your take on that?
Well, I'll answer the second question first. Frankly, I don't think that sort of contagion effect can spread to Asia. China is an entirely different, so perhaps Keith Richburg could comment on this, but I think China's an entirely different type of situation. I think, countries like the Philippines, to a certain extent, Thailand, Indonesia, went through this during the 70s and 80s. The fact that it's still a work in progress doesn't necessarily mean that it'll all rise up into a revolution again. I think there's still a lot of work to be done. But people have asked me, people seem to think that somehow Egypt can take lessons from Indonesia, for example, on its transformation to democracy. I don't think that's possible at all. It's the circumstances are entirely different. And at least in Indonesia, you had a civil society, a strong civil society, even during the Suharto period. And I think you had the institutions there, which you don't have in Egypt, and you certainly don't have them in other parts of the Middle East. So making comparisons, in my view, is a folly. To answer your first question, I discovered to my horror that the Thane of Cawdor, McBeth was never the Thane of Cawdor on my trip through Scotland in 2009. In fact, the Thane of Cawdor is a honorific title that was created 300 years after Macbeth's death and has been in the Campbell family ever since. I visited Cawdor Castle, which is not far from what's the name of the city in the in the west? Inverness, yeah. And I thought to myself, this castle is way too cute for a Macbeth. And when you go through Scotland, you realise just what a farce that play really is, the Shakespearean play. All the facts in there don't follow the story of the real Macbeth.
On the question of China, we're lucky enough to have the China correspondent of the Washington Post here. So I wonder if we can get Keith Richburg to say if he thinks that the Jasmine Revolution might spread to China.
We could wrap it up pretty soon.
Right. Keith, are you going to say something? No. Well, let's get Pichai, somebody from the Bangkok Post. Was he any good as a sub? Did he make a good career move going up? Pichai. It's before you. Peter Finucane, come and tell us. I think we're losing them.
I think we are.
You see, this is what, if you get 100 people in a room who haven't seen each other for 20 years, they talk. So this is inevitable. Peter Finucane, was he any good as a sub? Where are you?
I don't think he wants to pass judgment.
You've all gone quiet. Who else would like to ask a question? The microphone's there. Come forward. Please, just introduce yourself.
From the Bangkok Post. I'd love to say that John was a fine inspiration to whatever we did after the war.
Please, can we have a bit of quiet? Let's just hear this out and then finish and we can all talk to each other.
John was a fine inspiration to whatever we did after the paper was put to bed.
I don't think he heard that. Say it again. What did you do after the paper was put to bed? That's what
John, you're a fine inspiration to whatever we did after the paper was put to bed.
After the paper was put to bed, we retired to, first, in the early days at least, we retired to a coffee shop called the Tai Yanok, which is in the driveway of the Amarin Hotel, essentially here. And then after that, we moved on to the Terme at the entrance to Soi 13. On Saturday nights when we had a night off, we'd probably start at the Mosquito Bar in the Klong Toi area. It's all in the book.
Please, go on. Just get to the microphone if I see you.
John, would you care to elaborate on the Saturday morning tennis outings?
Tennis on Saturdays.
Yes, I'd like to tell you about Saturday morning tennis. It was an absolute travesty, if you ask me, but for some, we always had, certainly in the heydays of the late 70s, early 80s, we had what was known as Friday lunch. And this usually took place in an Italian restaurant on Patpong Soi 2. It would start with, hold on a minute. Got to go. Mm-hmm.
Yes. It's a blatantly commercial evening, as you see.
Sorry, it's not the name of it. Funny there. Thank you.
It's two down.
Okay, what else do you want to know? So,
I'm not going to ask a question, John.
okay.
I just want to tell you I got an email from Larry Doyle, who's in Tripoli, who wants to say hi to everybody he knows here, okay? Including you.
Thank you. Larry Doyle was a producer for CBS, He was in Baghdad during the first Gulf War. So was my wife, Yuli. I was really worried because I didn't know what she was doing. She was in the Al Rashid Hotel. And Larry Doyle looked after her, and I always thank him for doing that.
Just go ahead. Talk loud.
John, the book's about journalism. What's your view of the future of serious journalism? Are we sort of looking the end of it, or, I mean, a lot of us are worried about our careers. What's your view of it?
Yeah, I'm very worried about it. We're presumably talking about print journalism, which is the only journalism, really. Sorry, Derek. I'm very worried about it because I don't think that anybody has figured out how to make money on the web. I've got to say something about Rupert Murdoch. He's at least making an effort to try and find a formula that will enable us to do this. People don't understand that covering news costs money. And, today you're a freelance journalist, you write 1,000 words, you get paid $150. Nobody can live on that. That's pauper's wages. And it shouldn't be like this. We're supposed to be the content providers. Well, if we're so damn important, why don't they pay us a little more? And I'm really troubled that there's just, the way things are going, newspapers will fall by the wayside, and it'll be a sad day.
Questions? Come on, there must be lots of anecdotes waiting to come out.
How many you got?
Can you?
One for me.
I'm going to make you go to the microphone.
Please.
Dick Graham, was he any good at tennis? Was he any good at tennis?
See, I'll come back later.
He's a terrible tennis player. So, sorry. You got some very disloyal friends,
John, I'm wondering, is there a fresh interview in this book with Michael de Guzman? And could you tell us where he is and what his bank accounts are? Thank you.
I wish I could, Jay. I do believe he's still alive, though. I'm convinced he's still alive. I'm convinced that at one point he was living in Brazil. But as to his bank accounts, you've got to remember, de Guzman only made $5 million out of this. He wasn't one of the big, he didn't get one of the big payouts because he wasn't actually a member of the company, a executive on the company. Whether he'll ever surface, I don't know. But I frankly, I have no idea where he is now.
And following up, where does Briex rank in your 3 top stories you covered in your career, and what are the other 2?
Well, I'm not sure I suppose it is one of the best stories I've ever covered. I've never really put them in any order, but it's certainly a story that was a bit like a piece of chewing gum. You'll see this in the book, but it sort of attaches itself to you and you try to get rid of it, and it keeps coming back, and you never quite can get rid of it. And even today, I'm still convinced there's going to be another chapter to this story.
Keith, talk loudly.
All right. John, for a lot of us who came out to the region in the 80s and didn't know a thing, the Far Eastern Economic Review was our Bible. And I'm just wondering if you think, was that only a magazine for a specific time and place, or do you see any way that anything else could ever fill that void? Or could you talk a little bit about the review and the kind of role it played, and if anything should ever or could ever replace it in this 24/7 news cycle?
Yeah, I think the value of the review was that the reporters stayed in one place and literally covered it. We didn't have to jump from one place to another the way you guys have to. And so that was a tremendous advantage, in my opinion. And if you did your job well, and a lot of my colleagues on the review did, that's what made it such a great magazine. I'm one of these people, and I think David Plott would share this, that the review should still be alive. It was basically killed off by Dow Jones and you'll see all that in the book as well. I still think there's room in this region for a magazine of that nature. And I'm often reminded about it when I sit down and write an analysis of politics and say, Indonesia, you've got a wide open field. Because I find today that journalists seem to get in the room together and all decide what the story or what the angle of the story is. Nobody does any out-of-the-box thinking anymore. Everyone writes the same story. And I think you saw this here in Thailand during the problems last year. I was appalled at the coverage of the foreign media out of here last year. And it just told me that people aren't doing their jobs.
Right. Hit the mic.
Brad Martin. John?
Brad, good to see you.
Good to see you, sir. There's a rumor, John, that you finally tracked down Jim Thompson and have a contract to write ghostwrite his autobiography. He's 100 and some years old now. Is there any truth in this?
Totally untrue, Brad. However, I'm still amazed that he's never been found. I can only, I used to be a smoker, and I know he left a cigarette burning in the ashtray. No smoker leaves a cigarette burning in the ashtray and goes away for more than 2 minutes. And I have a very strong feeling that he was kidnapped. By who, I don't know. Some people think by Surit Tanarat's people. I don't know. But he was obviously taken out of the area. I don't think, given the search that went on in the Cameron Highlands at that time, I just can't believe that he was there.
Do you think he knew something, that he was indiscreet?
Well, it's hard to know, isn't it? I mean, I don't think anybody really knows. You have to remember he had sort of cornered the Thai silk market. It could have been as simple as that, a business conflict, as they call it.
John, we're fighting a losing battle against a wall of noise of people who want to talk to each other, and I don't think there's much point fighting it. So if there's anybody who wants to get something in quickly, say something. Bertel, would you like to talk about the guy that employed you? Bertel's lost.
No, let's wrap it up.
So look, I'm going to wrap it up. I'm going to pull out one quote, a John McBeth story, 21st of March, 1980. It was a story about the cavalry general who is married to the army and must now court Thai politicians, has a reputation for charm and strength. And it says here, apart from golf, Prem likes takraw, a local ball game. He has a fondness for spiced catfish and bright colours and dresses fastidiously, often attending official functions in a high-necked tunic designed by King Bhumibol Adulyadej. Above all, the new premier is a staunch monarchist, serving as a royal aide-de-camp in both 1969 and 1975. His appointment as premier is said to have delighted the king. That was written 31 years ago. John, it stood the test of time. This is the book that the FCC did on the king. It would not have been complete without at least one Macbeth story. And I'd like to present it to you and wish you the very best for your memoirs.
Thank you very much.
Okay, you can all get drunk now.
Oh, yeah. God, yeah. How you doing?
It's funny you mentioned Son Briefing. When I first met you was when you came with Sean to stay at Dixon.